She humiliated him, rolling her eyes and dismissing him as just another unimportant guest, until she learned his true identity. What happened next left the entire hotel staff stunned. The grand chandelier in the lobby cast a golden glow over the polished marble floors as the steady hum of conversation filled the air. The five-star hotel was alive with movement. Guests in designer suits checking in, wealthy travelers sipping cocktails in the lounge, and bellboys maneuvering luxury luggage carts. It was a place where elegance met exclusivity, where the world's elite came to indulge in comfort without question. Barron Trump stepped through the massive glass doors, his presence subtle yet commanding. Dressed in dark jeans and a crisp button-down, he looked like any other young man on a business trip. Tall, composed, but deliberately low profile. There were no security guards flanking him, no fanfare announcing his arrival. He didn't want it. For once, he wanted to be treated as an ordinary guest, not as the heir to a global empire. He strode toward the front desk, where a receptionist, Julia, sat tapping away at her keyboard. She barely spared him a glance, her expression one of mild irritation, as if she had far more important things to do. Without looking up, she let out a tired sigh. "Checking in?" Barron nodded. "Yes, I'd like a suite, please." His tone was polite, but there was an ease in his voice, one that came naturally from someone who had been raised in privilege but had never flaunted it. Julia finally looked at him, her gaze scanning him quickly. No suit, no expensive watch, no entourage. Just another young guest trying his luck. Her lips twisted into a smirk. "We're fully booked," she said flatly, tapping her nails on the desk. "Unless, of course, you can afford our VIP suites, which, by the way, start at 5 figures per night." Barron raised an eyebrow, not at the price, but at the way she said it. He had stayed in hotels around the world and knew when someone was being condescending. "I'll take one," he said calmly. Julia scoffed. "Sure you will." Her tone dripped with sarcasm, and for the first time, she really met his eyes. There was something about his unwavering confidence that made her hesitate, but she quickly brushed it off. "Unless you have an unlimited credit card, I'd suggest you try something more budget-friendly." Her voice was laced with amusement, expecting him to fumble or retreat in embarrassment. Barron, however, didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, watching her with the same composed stare he had inherited from his father. "So, you only respect people based on how they look?" His voice was calm, yet sharp enough to cut through the air like glass. Julia's smirk faltered, but she had no idea what was about to happen next. The tension in the luxurious hotel lobby thickened as a few guests subtly paused their conversations, their gazes flickering toward the front desk. The marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of the chandeliers, but the atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as a simple check-in had turned into a spectacle. Barron Trump stood firm, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharp. His request for a suite had been met with nothing but arrogance and dismissal from the receptionist, Julia, whose smirk barely concealed her assumption that he didn't belong. "This is a luxury establishment," she repeated, arms crossed, tapping her nails against the keyboard. "We don't do discounts, and we certainly don't have space for last-minute walk-ins." A murmur passed through the small line forming behind him. A well-dressed couple exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. Others subtly leaned in, sensing the tension rising between the young man with quiet confidence and the receptionist dripping with condescension. Barron remained unfazed. "I didn't ask for a discount," he said evenly. "I'm happy to book any available suite." Julia scoffed, flipping through the system without real intent. "People like you always expect special treatment." The words hung in the air, thick with presumption. People like you. She had decided who he was before he even had the chance to explain. A tall man in a crisp black suit, standing just a few feet away, took a small step forward. Mr. Carter, the senior staff member, had been watching the exchange closely. His face remained neutral, but his keen eyes betrayed an understanding of what was unfolding. Barron glanced at Julia, his expression calm yet piercing. "And what kind of person do you think I am?" Julia smirked. "I think you're just another kid trying to get a taste of luxury you can't afford." The words were barely out of her mouth when Mr. Carter finally spoke. "That's enough, Julia." She stiffened. Barron's gaze didn't waver, but beneath the composed exterior, something flickered. Not anger, but disappointment. Julia's smirk lingered for only a moment before she delivered the final blow. "If you can't afford it, maybe try a motel down the street." Her voice was dripping with mockery, the kind of dismissal that came from years of assuming who belonged and who didn't. Before Barron could respond, a sudden shift in the air cut through the tension. A woman in a tailored navy blazer approached the front desk in hurried steps, her face noticeably pale. Sarah, the assistant hotel manager, had overheard enough. She leaned in, whispering something urgently into Julia's ear. Whatever was said, it landed like a thunderclap. Julia's confident expression froze, her face draining of color. The smirk vanished, replaced with something else, pure panic. She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edges of the sleek marble desk. This is Mr. Trump's hotel?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded. "And this is Barron Trump, heir to the Trump brand." The weight of those words hit like a freight train. Julia's mind raced, replaying every word she had just spoken, every sneer, every assumption. The heir to the Trump empire had stood before her, calm and patient, while she had treated him like a nobody. The murmurs among guests swelled. A couple in designer clothing exchanged knowing glances. A bellboy adjusting luggage by the concierge desk paused, his eyes wide. The entire lobby was watching. Julia opened her mouth, fumbling for an apology. "Mr. Trump, I didn't know. I didn't mean—" Barron, still composed, simply tilted his head slightly, his gaze steady but unreadable. "So, respect is only given when you know someone has power?" His words cut deeper than any reprimand ever could. Julia flinched, realization sinking in. The man she had mocked wasn't just any guest, and now she had no choice but to face the consequences of her own judgment. Silence hung in the air. Then, just as Julia thought it couldn't get worse, Mr. Carter, the senior manager, stepped forward. His voice was calm, but firm. "We need to talk, Julia." And just like that, the game had changed. The air in the luxurious hotel lobby felt heavier now, thick with the weight of realization. Julia's once confident smirk had crumbled into a pale mask of shock. The heir to the Trump empire had stood before her, patient and unassuming, while she had treated him like he was insignificant. A hush had fallen over the guests. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some people exchanging glances, others subtly inching forward to catch every detail. A bellboy nervously adjusted a luggage cart, his eyes wide with disbelief. Everyone knew the power of the Trump name. Julia, still frozen behind the marble desk, finally found her voice. "Mr. Trump, I had no idea. I didn't mean—" Barron, calm and composed, tilted his head slightly, studying her. His expression wasn't angry, but there was something deeper there. Disappointment. "Interesting," he said, his voice quiet yet cutting. "So, respect is only given when you know someone has power?" The words sliced through the silence like a blade. Julia visibly flinched, her breath hitching as her earlier arrogance replayed in her mind. She opened her mouth again, but no words came. There was no excuse that could undo what had just happened. The tension held the entire room captive, until Mr. Carter, the senior hotel manager, finally stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Julia," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." The weight of Barron Trump's words settled over the room like a heavy curtain. The murmurs among the guests had died down, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. Julia stood motionless, her fingers gripping the desk, her confidence completely shattered. Mr. Carter cleared his throat, glancing between Barron and Julia, his expression unreadable. "Unfortunately, this isn't the first time we've had complaints," he admitted, his tone even but firm. "Some guests have mentioned feeling unwelcome at this desk." Julia's breath hitched. Her arrogance had blinded her to the reality that people had noticed and remembered how she treated those she deemed unimportant. Barron, still composed, studied her for a moment before speaking. "Does she treat all guests like this? Or just the ones she thinks don't matter?" Julia felt her face heat up. The truth was undeniable. Barron exhaled softly, glancing around the opulent lobby. "A hotel isn't great because of its chandeliers," he said, his voice measured. "It's great because of the way it treats people." Julia's eyes glistened. She had spent so much time looking down on others, never realizing who she might be standing in front of. Mr. Carter turned to Julia. "We will discuss your future here, but first, I suggest you take a moment to reflect on what you just learned." As Barron walked away, Julia finally understood. Respect isn't about status. It's about character. Julia stood frozen, her mind racing as Barron Trump's words echoed in her head. A hotel isn't great because of its chandeliers. It's great because of the way it treats people. The realization struck like a wave. She had spent years judging guests by appearances, never imagining she'd humiliate the very person who could decide her fate. Mr. Carter sighed, turning to Barron. "Would you like us to process her dismissal?" he asked cautiously. Julia's stomach twisted. She had made a terrible mistake. But was it too late to fix it? Barron shook his head. "Firing someone doesn't teach them anything," he said. "Let her learn what real hospitality means." Mr. Carter raised an eyebrow. "You mean training?" Barron nodded. "Make sure she understands that respect should never be conditional." Julia swallowed hard, her face flushed with embarrassment, but also something unexpected. Relief. She had been given a second chance, one she never expected. As Barron walked away, she watched him with a newfound understanding. Power wasn't about control. It was about integrity. That evening, Barron quietly checked into a standard suite, proving that the true mark of a leader isn't demanding privilege. It's choosing humility. What would you have done in Barron Trump's place? Shown grace or demanded consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more thought-provoking stories.